Evening settled like a tired sigh over the Hartley ranch, and the light dripped gold through the cracks in the barn slats. Dust hung in the air, slow, sacred, unmoving, as though time itself had paused to listen. Elias Hartley stood in the yard, a figure carved out of silence and regret. The wide brim of his hat shaded eyes that had seen too much weather and not enough forgiveness. His ranch was quiet now, too quiet. Even the horses sensed what was coming. Inside the house, Mélingeau stirred the last pot of the day. The scent of ginger and wild onion floated through the dim kitchen, wrapping itself around the wooden beams like a prayer. She worked without looking up, her movements graceful, disciplined, the way one moves when hope must stay hidden. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, her dark braids streaked with flour, her gaze somewhere far beyond the window where the first stars gathered. Once she had dreamed of music and lanterns by the river back home. Now she dreamed only of safety. At the table, Clara Hensley mended a tear in an old curtain. Her blonde hair was pinned loose, her eyes a clear, washed-out blue that looked like rain after it's done falling. She had been a settler's fiancée once, until a letter never came and the wagon never returned. She'd learned to patch her own roof, mend her own wounds, and find quiet corners where the world's noise could not reach her. She did not look up when Mélin hummed softly, a tune neither could name but both found comfort in. Outside, Elias listened to that faint hum and felt a restlessness crawl up through his boots. The rumor mill in town had churned for weeks now. Two young women, both pretty in their quiet ways, living under a widower's roof. Some said unholy things. Others whispered pity. Elias told himself he didn't care, but pride and loneliness are dangerous partners. Tonight they gnawed him like coyotes. He kicked at the dirt, jaw tightening. Maybe it was time to end the talk, to return to the comfort of empty rooms and the safe company of silence. The women had done their work well, too well. They'd softened the place, filled it with laughter he pretended not to hear. Even old Tom Braddock, his ranch hand, had said the house smelled like life again. Maybe that frightened him most of all. He stepped onto the porch. Through the open door, lamplight flickered across Mélin's face as she lifted the stew from the stove. Clara set out 3 bowls, her hands steady, her movements slow as if she wanted to delay the inevitable moment he would sit down and they would all pretend nothing was breaking. The air felt too still. Elias cleared his throat. "We need to talk." Both women froze, like deer who sense the hunter's shadow. Mélin straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. Clara set the last bowl down and folded her hands before her. Elias looked from one to the other, then away as if their eyes held truths he wasn't brave enough to see. "I've been hearing things," he began. "Town's restless. I don't want trouble." The words came heavy, deliberate. "Pack your belongings. Both of you. Leave by morning." The silence that followed was alive, thick enough to taste. Mélin's lashes lowered. Clara's breath left her chest in a quiet tremor. Neither spoke. Neither argued. They simply absorbed it the way people absorb storms, with resignation, not surprise. Mélin turned first, ladling the stew into bowls though no one would eat now. "Yes, Mr. Hartley," she whispered. Her accent softened the words, made them sound almost kind. Clara nodded, eyes dry but shining. "We'll be ready by sunrise." Elias hated the way their voices made it sound easy. He sat alone at the table after they left the room, the untouched bowls steaming like ghosts of what could have been. His hands tightened around the spoon until it bent. What right had he to feel wronged? They'd done nothing but bring warmth into his life, warmth he'd mistaken for danger. Still he said nothing. Pride, that old rusted weapon, kept him company. In the back room, Mélin folded her few dresses into a faded satchel. Each fold was a memory she refused to show. Clara helped her in silence, their shadows merging on the wall. The house creaked softly as though it too mourned the decision. Mélin's voice broke the stillness. "He is not a bad man," she said. "Just afraid of what others see." Clara smiled sadly. "Afraid of what he feels, maybe?" Their laughter was brief, small, tender, 2 women laughing to stay from crying. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering dry leaves across the porch. Elias stepped out again, drawn by habit or guilt. The moon rode high, a silver coin caught in the clouds. He saw a movement by the barn, Mélin standing alone, shawl wrapped around her, looking up at the stars like she was searching for an old friend. He almost called her name. Instead he turned away. His heart beat too loud in his chest. Back inside he found Clara's mending basket left on the chair. A spool of thread rolled to his feet. He picked it up, fingers closing around the soft coil. Strange how something so small could carry such weight. He placed it on the table and sat down hard, elbows on his knees. The clock ticked on the mantel. Every second sounded like an accusation. He thought of his late wife, how she used to hum while cooking just like Malin. How her laughter used to echo through these same rooms, just like Clara's gentle talk. He thought he'd buried those sounds for good. Now they'd returned wearing different voices and he'd chased them away. The lamps burned low. The stew cooled. In the bedroom, the women lay awake, each facing opposite walls but thinking the same thoughts. That kindness is always punished too soon, that safety is fleeting, that maybe good men are not always brave men. Outside, coyotes cried on the ridge, their voices thin and lonely. Sometime past midnight, Elias rose and opened the door. The night air cut cold across his face. The sky was endless, the kind of dark that swallowed regrets whole. He saw the wagon near the fence, their bundles already stacked. They'd obeyed without question. That obedience shamed him more than defiance ever could. He walked toward the corral, boots crunching frost. The horses stirred. He laid a hand on the fence rail, rough wood against rougher palms, and stared at the horizon where dawn would come too soon. His mind offered a dozen justifications: protecting their reputations, avoiding gossip, keeping the ranch's name clean. None felt honest. A sound drifted from the house. Mayleen's voice, quiet, singing in a language he didn't know. The melody rose and fell like wind through reeds. It carried loneliness, forgiveness, and something else. Hope, maybe. Elias closed his eyes. The song pressed against his ribs until it hurt to breathe. He wanted to go back inside, to take back the words, to say stay. But pride stood in the doorway like a guard. So he did what men like him often do. He turned away, mistaking silence for strength. The moon slipped behind a cloud. The world dimmed. Elias looked once more at the faint light glowing from the kitchen window and felt the ache of a man who'd built walls only to discover he lived inside a cage. He whispered into the wind, voice barely a breath. What have I done? Behind that window, Malin paused in her song as if she'd heard him. But she did not move. Neither did he. And when dawn came, it would find all three hearts half-packed. None truly ready to leave, yet too proud, too wounded to stay. Dawn crept softly over the Hartley ranch, laying silver light upon the frost-bitten earth. The wind carried the scent of pine and ash, as if the world itself was mourning what would be lost by morning. Inside the small cabin, the sound of quiet packing began. The dull thud of folded linen, the whisper of fabric against worn wood, the fragile rhythm of lives uprooted once again. Malin Jo folded her shawl first, then her small handful of belongings. A carved spoon, a bundle of herbs wrapped in muslin, a faded photograph of a mother she hadn't seen in years. Her hands moved with the precision of someone long trained in leaving. Every motion was careful, reverent, though her eyes shimmered like light beneath glass. She did not cry. Grief, to her, had always been something carried in silence, not spilled for others to see. Clara Hensley, across the room, folded her own few dresses into a basket. Her blonde hair glowed faintly in the morning light, like straw brushed with gold. Her face was composed but distant, as though she had practiced this kind of goodbye before. The ranch had been her last safe place, a small mercy in a life of wandering and whispered shame, and she feared she'd never find its like again. Still, she worked, steady and quiet, her lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. Between them, the air felt heavy with the unsaid. The walls themselves seemed to hold their breath, as if unwilling to release the warmth these women had woven into the house. Mayleen's voice broke the stillness. "Do you think he meant it?" she asked, her accent soft like wind over silk. Clara hesitated. "He's a proud man," she said finally. "Pride makes people say things they don't always mean." Malin tied a piece of twine around her bundle, fingers trembling slightly. "In my country," she murmured, "we say pride is a mask for loneliness." Clara looked up, startled by the quiet wisdom in those words. Then he must be the loneliest man in the West. They both smiled faintly, and for a moment, sorrow turned into shared understanding. Outside, a crow called once, a sharp, black note splitting the morning. Elias Hartley stood near the barn, watching through the frosted window. He had been awake since before dawn, haunted by the echo of his own command. "Pack your belongings." The words replayed in his mind like the dull thud of a hammer against stone. He had convinced himself it was right, clean, decisive, necessary, but as the light spread across the valley, he found no peace in the logic. Only an ache that refused to quiet. The women moved like ghosts inside the house, their silhouettes faint through the glass. He could see the curve of Mayleen's shoulder as she leaned to lift a basket, the delicate bend of Clara's head as she brushed her sleeve across her cheek. They looked small against the vastness of the room, two gentle lives being erased by his own fear. He turned away, the guilt pressing deep into his chest. Malin stepped outside a short while later to hang the kettle over the fire pit, though there was no reason to cook now. The morning air bit at her cheeks and her breath came in small, white clouds. She didn't look toward the barn, but she felt him there, the weight of his silence like a shadow at her back. She poured water into the pot, hand steady despite the cold. The smell of smoke clung to her shawl. Somewhere in the distance, the horses stamped restlessly in their stalls. She thought of all the nights she had fed them after dark, of the gentle snorts when they recognized her voice. They would forget her soon enough. Inside, Clara finished her packing and sat on the edge of the bed. The room looked hollow without their things. A single hairpin gleamed on the dresser, left behind by accident. She held it a moment, then set it down again. Some things, she decided, were meant to stay where they had belonged once. When Malin returned, the two women shared the last breakfast they would ever make in that kitchen. There was no talking at first, only the faint clatter of spoons against tin. Malin's stew tasted of ginger and ache. Clara's bread was dry but warm. Elias entered quietly, his boots heavy against the floorboards. The smell of wood smoke curled around him as he sat at the head of the table, just as he always had. But this time the air between them was different, thicker, heavier. He reached for his bowl, then stopped, his hand hovering above the spoon. Clara's voice broke the silence. "We're grateful for everything you've done, Mr. Hartley." Elias looked up sharply. Gratitude wasn't what he deserved. He wanted to tell her not to thank him, that he wasn't the kind of man one thanked. But pride held his tongue still. Malin's eyes stayed on the table. "It was good work," she said softly. "Good food. Good land." Her words trembled with the simplicity of truth. Elias nodded stiffly. "You'll find other work soon enough." Neither woman replied. Their silence carried more grace than his words ever could. When breakfast ended, Elias stood abruptly and left. The sound of the door closing seemed to echo across the whole ranch. Clara sighed, staring after him. "He doesn't even realize what he's losing." Malin smiled sadly. "Maybe he does. That is why he looks so angry." They loaded their few belongings onto the wagon before noon. Clara tied down the last bundle and took one long look at the house, the windows glowing with pale light, the chimney smoke curling thin into the air. "It's strange," she whispered, "how a place can feel like home only when you're about to leave it." Malin reached for her hand and squeezed gently. "Home is not a place," she said. "It is people. But people forget that." The sound of small footsteps startled them. Little Jacob, the neighbor's boy, came running from the ridge, his cheeks flushed and his breath coming hard. He clutched a wooden toy horse in one hand. "Miss Malin," he cried, "don't go. Mama says you make the best dumplings in the world." Malin knelt, smiling faintly. "Someone else will make you better ones." Jacob shook his head fiercely. "No. You belong here. You and Miss Clara both." His words pierced the silence like sunlight through clouds. Clara looked away, tears stinging her eyes. Malin pressed a kiss to the boy's hair, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes, little one, belonging is not enough to make people stay." Elias watched from the porch, unseen. The sight of that small boy clinging to Malin's skirt tore through him. He felt something shift deep inside, an ache that refused to be buried. Pride faltered just a little. For the first time he wondered if loneliness had made him cruel. The wagon creaked as they climbed aboard. Malin's hands were folded neatly in her lap, Clara's eyes fixed on the horizon. The horses waited, stamping softly in the dust. Elias wanted to speak, to say wait, but his voice caught somewhere between his ribs and his throat. The wind rose again, carrying the faint sound of Jacob's crying. Elias's knuckles whitened around the porch rail. The wagon hadn't yet moved, but in his chest, something already felt gone. The women looked back once, both of them, as if hoping he might stop them. He didn't move. And in that still, aching silence, the distance between them began, measured not by miles but by the words he could not say. The wind carried the sound of creaking wheels down the long dirt road, a mournful song that matched the ache in every heart that morning. Elias Hartley stood near the porch rail, hands gripping the wood hard enough to leave grooves in the grain. The wagon rolled slowly across the yard, carrying Malin Joe and Clara Hensley away, two silhouettes framed by the rising sun. Their bundles were small, their backs straight, but he could feel the weight of what he'd done trailing behind them like a shadow too heavy for dawn to lift. He didn't call out. He didn't wave. He only stood there until the wagon turned past the ridge and disappeared, leaving behind the sound of wind and the faint scent of ginger from the kitchen that used to feel alive. The ranch fell quiet again, the kind of silence that mocked a man. Malin didn't look back at first. She sat beside Clara, her shawl pulled tight, her hands folded in her lap. The road stretched endless before them, carved into dust by countless others who'd left places that no longer wanted them. The horses' hooves struck the earth in an unbroken rhythm, steady, merciless. She closed her eyes and thought of how the air used to smell when bread was baking and Elias's boots crossed the porch behind her. There had been a time when that sound meant safety. Now it meant memory. Clara glanced at her friend, reading the silence between them as only women who have endured together can. "We'll find a place," she said softly, though her voice lacked conviction. "There's always some ranch needing cooks come spring." Maylin nodded, but her lips trembled. "A place," she repeated, as though the word itself were a prayer. "Not a home." They rode for an hour before stopping at the edge of town. The air smelled of sawdust and coffee grounds, of lives lived too close together. The boarding house loomed ahead, tired paint, broken shutters, a woman sweeping the porch with one eye on everything. As Maylin climbed down, her shawl slipped, and Clara caught it mid-fall, both smiling faintly at the small mercy of a familiar gesture. Inside the general store, whispers followed them. Women at the counter glanced up from their ledgers, exchanging looks heavy with judgment. Men leaned on barrels, murmuring under their breath. To them, two women arriving alone meant something to talk about. To Maylin and Clara it meant survival. Mrs. Finch, the storekeeper, looked up and clicked her tongue. "Elias Hartley finally got rid of his shadows then?" she said, handing Clara a tin of tea without meeting her eyes. "He'll miss your cooking, I'll give you that." Clara's fingers tightened around the tin, her jaw firm. "Maybe," she said. "But we'll manage." She turned away before the older woman could reply. Outside, Maylin sat on the wagon's edge, watching the dust swirl around her boots. She felt invisible and seen all at once, an ache she had grown used to. A boy passed by carrying apples, dropped one by accident, and when she knelt to hand it back, he whispered, "Pa says you're the Chinese lady who made the ranch smell like heaven." She smiled at that, though her eyes burned. "Tell your pa I am just a cook," she said softly. "Heaven does not need me." Back on the ranch, Elias couldn't stand the emptiness. The rooms echoed with absence. Every chair seemed to accuse him. He wandered into the kitchen and found the stew pot Maylin had scrubbed clean the night before, gleaming under the morning light. A single strand of her dark hair clung to the rim. He brushed it away, then stopped, his fingers trembling. That simple thing, so small, so human, broke him more than any fight or winter storm ever had. Old Tom Braddock found him sitting at the table hours later, elbows on his knees, eyes lost somewhere past the walls. "They gone then?" Tom asked, slow and cautious. Elias nodded. "Gone." Tom rubbed his chin. "You sure that's what you wanted?" Elias didn't answer. His throat closed around the truth. He wasn't sure of anything except the hollowness spreading through him like a drought. Meanwhile, Maylin and Clara walked the town in search of work. Every door offered the same polite shake of the head. Too full. Too poor. Too much talk. The farther they went, the heavier their steps became. When evening came, they found themselves back where they started, the wagon parked in the same patch of shadow. The boarding house woman offered them a room for $2 they didn't have. Clara's pride burned as she asked if they could pay after a week of work. The woman's laugh was answer enough. As night fell, Maylin pulled her shawl close, sitting by the wagon wheel. "He will not remember us," she said quietly. "Men like him, they forget kindness once it is gone." Clara shook her head. "No. I think forgetting will be what hurts him most." Elias spent that same night by the fire, the smell of smoke thick in his hair. He tried reading an old ledger, tried counting the horses, tried anything to drown out the silence, but the silence always won. He saw flashes in his mind, Maylin laughing with flour on her hands, Clara humming while sweeping the porch, the way the air had once held warmth even on the coldest nights. Now it held only ghosts. Near midnight, he found himself in the kitchen again. On the counter sat Maylin's small basket of herbs, forgotten, or maybe left behind on purpose. He lifted the cloth covering it. Inside lay bundles of dried thyme, mint, and something faintly sweet he didn't recognize. The scent rose and filled the air, soft and living. He sank to the floor, the basket cradled in his hands, and whispered her name. The next morning, Elias hitched his horse and rode into town. The wind was sharp, the sky pale as bone. He told himself it was to settle accounts for supplies, to deliver feed money, but his heart knew better. When he arrived, he saw them almost instantly, two figures sitting outside the boarding house, shoulders pressed together against the cold. Maylin's braid hung loose down her back, and Clara's hands were clasped tightly around a mug of weak coffee. They looked tired, smaller somehow, but when they saw him they straightened. He dismounted, hat in hand. "You're both still here," he said, as though it were the strangest thing in the world. Clara's voice was steady. "There wasn't anywhere else to go." Elias shifted his weight. "You could have gone farther." Malin met his gaze, calm and unflinching. "And be treated like ghosts?" she asked softly. "At least here the earth knows our names." Her words struck him deep. He swallowed hard. He stopped, uncertain what could make right what pride had broken. Mrs. Finch's voice carried from across the street. "Well, look who crawled into town with his tail tucked." Elias Hartley, coming to fetch what he tossed aside. Laughter followed. The sound made his spine stiffen, but he didn't look away from the two women. Clara rose first. "We don't need saving," she said. "Only a place to stand without being looked at like we don't belong." Elias's voice came rough, low. "Then come home. Both of you." The word home hung between them, trembling, alive. Malin's breath caught, eyes wide with something that might have been disbelief, or hope. "Why?" she asked. "Because you are sorry? Or because the house feels empty?" He took a long breath. "Both," he admitted. "And because I was wrong." The street went quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting. Malin looked at Clara, then back at him. "We left because you told us to," she said. "If we come back, it must be because we choose it, not because you changed your mind." Clara touched her arm. "He's trying, Malin," she whispered. "Maybe that's a start." Elias stepped closer, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "You made that house more than timber and dust. It was alive when you were in it. Let me make things right." For a long moment no one moved. Then Malin rose, wrapping her shawl tighter. "We will come," she said. "But not as servants. As people." Elias nodded, the first hint of warmth breaking through his expression. "As people," he said, his voice steady. As they climbed into the wagon, the sky began to change, blue deepening to gold, light returning to the land. The road that had carried them away now waited to carry them home again. Elias took the reins, glancing at Malin beside him. For the first time she didn't look away. And as the horses started forward, the sound of the wheels against the dirt was no longer sorrowful but something else, like a heart learning to beat again. Behind them, the townsfolk watched in silence. Mrs. Finch crossed her arms, muttering something Elias didn't catch. But for once he didn't care. He looked at Malin, at the faint smile curving her lips, and realized he had not brought them home out of guilt. He had done it because he couldn't imagine home without them. Still, as the ranch came into view, the light softening against the hills, a single thought lingered like a warning. Some confessions cannot wait forever. And though peace had returned for now, he knew the hardest truth was yet to be spoken. The road home felt longer in reverse, as though the land itself wanted to test whether they truly meant to return. The wagon rolled slow across the sun-bleached valley, the wheels groaning like old bones. Elias held the reins loosely, eyes fixed ahead, but his heart wrestled with every silent mile. Behind him, Malin and Clara sat close, neither speaking, both studying the horizon as though expecting it to vanish the closer they drew. By the time the ranch came into view, the light had turned the fields into a pale ocean of gold, and the wind smelled faintly of hay and memory. The house waited like a question. Smoke still rose from the chimney where Tom Braddock had kept the fire going, but the windows looked hollow without laughter behind them. Elias helped the women down from the wagon, his movements careful, almost reverent. Malin's fingers brushed his briefly as she stepped onto the ground. That single touch sent something through him he didn't have words for. Clara noticed, though she said nothing. Her eyes were kind, not jealous, just quietly knowing. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and wood oil. The room seemed smaller now, as if the house had missed them. Malin set her basket on the table, smoothing her palm over its surface. "It feels strange," she said softly. "As if we never left, and yet we did." Clara walked toward the window, sunlight wrapping her in a faint halo. "Things don't stay waiting," she murmured. "They just pause until we return." Elias took off his hat, rubbing the brim between his fingers. "You can have your old rooms back," he said, trying to sound steady. "Nothing's been touched." His voice came rough, worn from words unused. The women nodded, and the quiet stretched until it nearly broke. The afternoon passed in slow, hesitant rhythms. Malin cleaned the kitchen, her movements precise, like a ritual of reclaiming. Clara swept the floors and opened the curtains, letting in light that made the air glow. Elias busied himself with repairs that didn't need doing, hammering nails into boards just to give his hands purpose. Every sound, the scrape of broom bristles, the tap of a spoon, felt heavier than it should. It was as if they were building trust out of the very air, one careful moment at a time. When the sun began to dip, painting the sky in streaks of amber and rose, Clara found herself outside by the corral. The horses snorted softly, tails flicking at flies, their shadows long against the earth. Elias was there, tightening a gate hinge, the smell of metal and leather thick in the air. For a long time she watched him work, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. Finally she said, "You don't have to keep fixing what isn't broken." He paused, looking up. "Maybe I do." She smiled faintly. "You can't build peace out of guilt, Elias." He straightened, the dying sunlight glinting off the sweat along his brow. "You think that's what I'm doing?" "I think," she said, stepping closer, "you're trying to make up for loneliness with motion. But loneliness doesn't listen to the sound of hammers." He stared at her, the air between them thick with the weight of her understanding. "You were right to leave," he said finally. "You and Malin both. I gave an order like it meant nothing. It did. It meant too much." Clara's eyes softened. "You weren't cruel. Just afraid." She drew a slow breath. "And I was afraid too. Afraid to care for another man who might one day decide I'd had enough of usefulness." He opened his mouth, but she lifted a hand to stop him. "Don't say anything. I need to finish this thought." Her voice trembled slightly but didn't falter. "I don't love you, Elias. Not like that. I could have, maybe, if life had gone differently. But I think what I felt was relief. Relief that someone still treated me with respect. I needed that to remember who I was." Elias nodded, his chest tightening. "That's more kindness than I deserve." She smiled again, small and real. "You deserve forgiveness. But maybe not mine." She glanced toward the house, where lamplight flickered through the window. "It's hers you need." He followed her gaze and felt something in him unravel. The thought of Malin waiting inside, shoulders framed by that soft glow, filled him with both hope and fear. He wanted to move toward her, but his boots felt rooted to the earth. Clara reached out and touched his arm. "Go on," she said gently. "She won't wait forever." Inside, the kitchen smelled of tea and earth. Malin was standing by the counter, her braid hanging over one shoulder, steam curling up from the pot in front of her. The light was dim, orange from the setting sun filtering through thin curtains. She looked up when Elias entered, her expression calm but unreadable. "I thought you might want tea," she said, pouring a cup. "It's jasmine. For peace." He took the cup, careful not to touch her fingers. "Thank you." They stood in silence for a long moment. Outside, the wind rattled the porch boards. The world seemed to shrink until only the two of them remained, her steady breathing, his unspoken words. "I wanted to say something," he began. "That night I told you to leave, I thought I was protecting you. I told myself that the world would think less of you if you stayed here. But truth is, I was protecting myself from what I was feeling." Her gaze met his, steady as a still lake. "And what were you feeling?" He swallowed hard. "Something I didn't understand. Something I was too afraid to name." She looked down at her hands. "Fear can build high walls," she said softly. "But even walls need doors." He stepped closer. "If there was a door, I missed it." Malin's lips curved slightly. "Maybe it's still there. Maybe you just never knocked." Her words hung between them, fragile as glass. Elias set the teacup down, the sound barely a whisper. "When you left," he said, voice low, "I thought the quiet would bring me peace. Instead, it sounded like the end of the world." Her eyes glistened, though no tears fell. "I didn't want to leave. But a woman learns to walk away before she's told twice." The honesty in her tone struck him like a hammer. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "For everything I didn't say and everything I said wrong." She nodded slowly. "I believe you." The door banged open then, and Tom Braddock's voice cut through the hush. "Rider coming down from town?" he said. "Fast one." Elias frowned. "Who?" Tom shrugged. "Didn't say. But looks like trouble." Moments later, a horse galloped up to the gate, dust swirling around its hooves. A young man swung down, face red with anger. "You Hartley?" he shouted. "You keep your foreign woman and your charity case, but don't expect peace from folks who know better." Elias stepped forward, body taut. "You best take your words elsewhere." But the man spat on the ground. "Whole town's talking, Hartley. You're a fool for bringing them back. Don't say you weren't warned when things get ugly." He turned his horse and rode off, leaving behind a cloud of bitterness. Elias stood still, fists clenched. When he turned, both women were watching him. Clara from the doorway, Malin from the shadows of the kitchen. He met Malin's gaze, the air sharp with the echo of insult. "I'm sorry," he said again, this time not to her alone but to everything that had allowed cruelty to linger. She stepped forward until they stood an arm's length apart. "Don't be sorry," she said. "Be brave." For a moment, neither moved. The wind outside had stilled, even the horses were quiet. Then Maylin reached out, her fingertips brushing the edge of his sleeve. "I used to think love was a gentle thing," she whispered. "But maybe it's only gentle after it survives being torn apart." He wanted to answer, to tell her that he understood, but his throat closed around the words. Instead, he did something simpler. He took her hand, rough and calloused against his own. The warmth of it felt like forgiveness. Clara watched from the doorway, her eyes glistening, a soft smile touching her mouth. She turned away quietly, giving them the privacy of dusk. The last light of day slipped across the room, landing on their joined hands. Outside, the sky deepened to violet, the first stars trembling awake. Elias looked down at Maylin, his voice no more than a breath. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll tell you what this feeling is." Her fingers tightened around his. "I already know," she whispered. And as the evening folded into night, the faint hum of the wind carried a promise neither dared speak aloud, one that would demand truth before dawn. The storm came with a vengeance that night, as though the sky itself demanded a confession from the earth. Wind tore through the plains, rattling windows and bending the barn doors against their hinges. Elias hardly moved through the house with the weight of a man who had run out of places to hide. Each creak of the floorboards, each flash of lightning outside, seemed to drag him closer to something he could no longer postpone. In the kitchen, the fire burned low but steady. Maylin sat near it, her shawl draped over her shoulders, the soft light gilding her face. Clara had long gone to bed, leaving them alone with the storm. Rain lashed the windows like thrown gravel. The kettle on the stove began to hum, but neither moved to stop it. Elias stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his expression carved from 100 unspoken regrets. "I should have fixed that shutter," he said, just to hear something human amid the roar. Maylin looked up. "It has weathered worse." Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly in her lap. He took a slow step forward. "I don't know about that." His tone carried a weight she understood. The lightning flared again, bright enough to draw their faces in sharp relief. The haunted man, the patient woman. Maylin rose then, her bare feet silent on the wood. "You should sit," she said gently. "You look like the storm is chasing you." "Maybe it is." His voice cracked halfway between a laugh and a sigh. "Maybe I've been running from it all along." She tilted her head, studying him with those dark, steady eyes that never asked, only saw. "Then stop running." He took another step, and the distance between them vanished until only the wind dared speak. The lamplight flickered across her features, and he saw everything he had been afraid of. Gentleness, trust, the terrible beauty of someone who saw through his armor. "I don't deserve peace," he said quietly. "Not after what I did." "You gave an order," she replied. "It was cruel, yes. But cruelty born of fear can still be forgiven." "I don't want forgiveness." He swallowed, his throat tight. "I want you to understand." Maylin's eyes softened. "Then tell me." He exhaled like a man releasing years of silence. "When I buried my wife, I thought I buried the part of me that could care again. The ranch became my armor. The work my excuse. Then you came along, both of you, and the house felt alive again. I thought it was weakness what you brought. But it was life. And I didn't know what to do with it." Maylin stood still, the firelight dancing over her features. "And now? Now I can't breathe when you're not near." The words tumbled out raw, stripped of pride. "You cook and the whole place smells like memory. You speak and even silence feels safe again. You made me remember what it feels like to be human." The kettle whistled, a sharp, trembling note, then quieted when Maylin lifted it off the stove. Her eyes glistened in the light. "You speak like a man at war with himself." "I am," he said. "But I'm tired of losing." Thunder cracked overhead. The house seemed to shake with it. He reached for her hand then, not gently but as though something inside him might break if he didn't. Her fingers were warm, smaller than his, but strong. She didn't pull away. "What would you have me do, Elias Hartley?" "Stay," he whispered. "Not because I asked you before. Because I need you to." She looked down at their joined hands. "You asked me once to leave. That wound is still there." "I know." His voice was hoarse. "And I'd spend every day trying to heal what I hurt." Her eyes lifted to his again, full of doubt and longing. "You think love is enough to fix a broken thing?" "No," he said simply. "But it's enough to start mending." For a moment, the storm outside matched the one in their silence. Then Malin took a slow step closer. You are a proud man, Elias. Too proud for half the tenderness you carry. He smiled faintly. You make it sound like a sin. It's not, she whispered. It's just lonely. Lightning split the horizon, and in that silver light, he saw her tears. He raised a hand, almost reverent, and brushed one from her cheek. You said once that pride is a mask for loneliness. I did. He leaned closer, his voice barely more than breath. Then I'm ready to take mine off. The words lingered, trembling between them, before she closed the space entirely. Her forehead rested lightly against his chest, her fingers clutching the fabric of his shirt. He stood still, afraid to move, afraid the moment might dissolve. Outside, thunder rolled like a drumbeat, and the rain softened into steady rhythm. He bent his head, his breath stirring the loose strands of her hair. Malin. She looked up and he kissed her, slow, uncertain but real. The taste of salt and storm, of fear melting into surrender. It wasn't a kiss of possession but of recognition, the kind that said you're home now. When they finally drew apart, both were trembling. She laughed softly, the sound fragile and new. You are a foolish man, she said, to wait so long for something so simple. He smiled, eyes glistening. I've been a fool most of my life. But tonight, I'd rather be foolish than afraid. They stood together as the fire burned low, their shadows merging on the wall. Outside, the wind quieted as though the world itself exhaled. Clara appeared briefly in the doorway, drawn by the silence. She saw them, hands clasped, faces gentle, and her own heart eased. She said nothing, only smiled and turned back down the hall, whispering to herself, so the storm found peace after all. Elias looked down at Malin, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. When I told you to leave, I thought I was protecting you from talk. But it wasn't the town I feared. It was what I felt. You've shown me there's more courage in kindness than in any fight. Malin's eyes shimmered. Kindness is not weakness, she said. It is the hardest thing to keep when the world takes it from you. He nodded slowly. Then I'll spend the rest of my life keeping it, with you. Her lips curved, her voice a whisper. Then you've already chosen. He drew her close again, the storm a distant murmur beyond the walls. Yes, he said. I choose you. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. Time seemed to slow. The ranch that had once been only wood and memory now felt alive again, beating to the rhythm of two hearts learning to trust. Outside, dawn's first gray light touched the edge of the clouds, painting the world in soft silver. Elias and Malin stood by the window, watching the storm fade into peace. He reached for her hand, entwining their fingers, and for the first time, he felt the future pressing warm against his chest instead of the past. Clara's laughter echoed faintly from the back room, and it sounded like life beginning again. Elias turned to Malin, his voice low, steady, certain. This house was never meant to be mine alone. You made it a home. And I won't let it go cold again. She smiled through tears. Then let's keep it warm together. Outside, the last drops of rain slid down the glass. Elias bent, kissed her forehead, and whispered, The night I chose love, the storm finally stopped. And when morning came, it found them still standing there, hands clasped, eyes soft, ready to begin again. Now tell me, where in this wide world are you listening from tonight? Because maybe love, in all its quiet stubbornness, still finds us wherever storms have passed.